Hello, everyone. Are we online? Bem-vindo. Welcome, everyone. My name is Emilia Sanabria. I'm a social anthropologist based in Paris, in France, and it's a pleasure to be moderating this important discussion today. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we actually jump in. Our discussion is going to run roughly 15 minutes over schedule, as agreed with the organizers, to give time for the 3 presentations and then a quick response from me. And then we'll have a Q&A session. So please put all your questions in the Q&A box, and then we'll take all of those together right at the end. So we'll first be hearing from neuroscientist and entrepreneur Eduardo Schoenberg, who has a postdoc at Imperial College London and has conducted the first pilot study of MDMA for PTSD in Brazil. And then we'll hear from Tomáš Paliníček, who is a psychiatrist based at the National Institute of Mental Health in the Czech Republic. And he has expertise in animal models of schizophrenia and an interest in EEG functional connectivity. And finally, we have the exciting opportunity to hear from Bané, one of the only indigenous voices at this conference. Yawa Bané is a Huni Queen leader who has deep experience leading ceremonies in Brazil and beyond. And the Huni Queen people, or true people as they refer to themselves, have a very long-standing ayahuasca tradition and an incredible corpus of sacred chants that guide the work of Nishipe as the medicine is known to them. So over to you, Eduardo.
Thank you, Emilia. Good morning, bom dia, Bané. It's morning over there in Acre, in the border between Brazil and Peru. Good afternoon to everybody in Europe and in later time zones. It's a pleasure to be here. As Emilia said, I'm Eduardo Schoenberg. I studied ayahuasca's effect in the brain, and I found a biphasic pattern with distinct stages after 1 or 2 hours after people drink. And these were measured in brain waves, which correlated with circulating plasma levels from many compounds that have distinct pharmacokinetics. Thus, we showed evidence that the scientific understanding that DMT is the only psychoactive compound is far too simplistic. Now, a decade after getting my PhD and formally starting research projects with psychedelics, I was recently recommended as a potential speaker for the psychiatry department of the University of São Paulo. One of the first things that I was asked was my age index. Numbers, measurements, science. 2 years ago, I was in the second Indigenous Ayahuasca conference in Acre, in Brazil. I drank ayahuasca with 300 indigenous people. And with my eyes closed, I could see caravels and I could see scenes of 500 years of colonization. Subjective personal experience, indigenous wisdom and mystery. These important conferences in Acre were triggered out of indigenous dissatisfaction with the World Ayahuasca Conference in Rio Branco that was organized mostly by Europeans in the presence of few indigenous people and where no one drank ayahuasca. I was invited to the indigenous conference to present a project to scientifically study the brain during indigenous ayahuasca rituals. In the Puyanawa territory, I was asked by an Ashaninka leader why to study the brain rather than studying people and the spiritual healing transformations that were possible with ayahuasca. For them, it's almost as if the brain never existed. It had no importance whatsoever. As a Unikuin humorously put it to me, Mapuchao, the brain, is the part of the hunt that no one wants to eat. My involvement with ayahuasca started 20 years ago. I experienced daime a few times, ayahuasca with a Peruvian vegetalista, jarre with a Colombian healer, Heu with the Puyanawa, Nishipan with Unikuin, Chanás, and Daiwas. For them, my name is Nui Inu Bakan, after an initiation that I had with them in 2018 in the Amazon. These journeys had started many years before in the urban neighborhoods of São Paulo, where I met my good friend Leopardo Diawabani, who is here with us today. And he showed interest in doing a scientific study in the forest. More recently, in 2017, we met Dr. Tomáš Paliníček from Nudes in distant Prague, who also had and shared this similar dream. Thus, in early 2018, the three of us traveled to Acre for our first conversations with more Unicui people. They were all very friendly and polite, but the idea of a scientific study was not welcomed, especially among some elders. They claimed that indigenous people had nothing to gain from Western research and actually could risk their most precious and well-protected spiritual and sacred knowledge. Since then, I've been studying and reading more indigenous writers. From Maori Linda Tuhai Smith, I learned, for example, that the word research is considered one of the dirtiest in indigenous vocabularies, given the intimate relationship with brutal imperialism and colonization practices of the past, which to some extent, unfortunately, are still ongoing. I also read Miranda Fricker, and then I realized that in its neurocentricity, science has been committing epistemic injustices in the study of ayahuasca. And thus the Unicui elders' worry was actually justifiable. After 3 decades of scientific study of ayahuasca, almost no one cared to properly share with them any of this information, which is encrypted in papers full of technical jargon in English, mostly locked under paywalls for the sole benefit of overseas corporations. Worse still, all this information brings little benefit to indigenous peoples and their practices. As they claimed in the formal document from their second conference, their medicines do not require scientific validation or proof. Still, I think science can greatly contribute, and some agreed with me. We worked 2 years to get unanimous approval from the Unicui Federation for a forthcoming Nishipan and Rapé EEG brainwave study. We did the process that should always be done according to international treaties, such as ILO 169, which establishes previous consultations with indigenous people as mandatory. We will thus bring the lab to ayahuasca in the Amazon. Yet, this contribution can only be ethical if done with respect. Respect and recognition for their true capacity as givers of knowledge. Hopefully then, neuroscience will help us overcome these epistemic injustices. So I hope this symposium will symbolically represent the beginning of a new era in ayahuasca research, overcoming epistemic injustices from which not only indigenous people lose a lot, science also loses a lot. For example, after 30 years of epistemically unjust research, science is not even close to understanding the variety of plants, preparation methods, and indications. Second, scientists do not know how to determine a basic variable such as the appropriate ayahuasca dosage. Third, dismissing purging as an adverse event precludes scientists to research antiparasitic properties and effects of ayahuasca in the microbiome. And finally, fourth, and maybe more important, a general dismissal of the subjective experience, favoring brain measurements, may be precluding the most important teachings and insights ayahuasca has to offer. I believe now is the time to move even further and jointly develop a full cultural and legal international process for a respectful and ethical approval and recognition of the therapeutic properties of indigenous medicines, so much needed in these times of mental health crisis, disconnection to nature, and increasing aggression between human beings. By honestly and truly engaging with indigenous epistemologies, we may be able to expand scientific practices and understandings. This may help heal not only urban people with depression and other ailments worldwide, but also healing indigenous wounds and traumas of colonization. Ultimately, in union, we may be able to help them to thrive while there is still time to save the Amazon from these shawara epidemics and insane fires that are currently going on. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, over to you, Tomas, I believe.
So hello, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me now. Thank you, Eduardo, for a great introduction. And I will also try to use some slides during my talk. So I'm going to share my screen. now, okay, and I'll run the presentation. Okay, just please, everybody sees the presentation already? Good, thank you. So once again, thank you, Eduardo, for a nice introduction. And before I start showing some slides, I would just go a little bit to the past. I'm a neuroscientist and a psychiatrist that is studying psychedelics, not only in animals, but also we are conducting clinical trials in healthy volunteers with psilocybin, as well as in patients. And also we also work with ketamine in healthy and in patients and some other compounds as well. And during our studies and the work we do, we just came to an idea a long time ago that we are studying psychedelics in a lab setting or hospital setting, but it would be very interesting to have a look on how psychedelics do act on the brain and on our minds when they are used in the traditional setting, and that all scientists should probably know, those who are studying psychedelics, they should know about the traditional way of psychedelic use. And as ayahuasca is definitely the most abundant psychedelic that is currently used by people in a traditional context, we have decided to focus a little bit on ayahuasca. Why we believe this is important? It's important because there's something that is creating the unique experience after psychedelics and also predicting most likely its long-term effects. And it's something we call and know as set and setting. So the individual mindset on individual expectations and the environment where we take psychoactive substances is definitely related to the phenomenology and short-term and long-term outcome. There is a nice study published by Robin Carhart-Harris about patients with depression who received psilocybin. And these patients were treated in a traditional hospital setting. These are images of the experiments where we perform experiments with psychedelics. On the left side, we can see a traditional, living room-like place where we work with patients on psilocybin, and on the right side, it's an EEG lab where we also use psychedelics. So it's decorated in order to make an environment more relaxed and pleasurable. Of course, it's very different to what we know that the traditional use is like, which is typically ceremonial and nature, and more people participating on the ceremony. So I'm going back to the study that was done by Robin in depressed patients who were treated with psilocybin. Lior Roseman then found that there were differences between those who were responding to psilocybin and those who were not responding to psilocybin. And they found out that those who were responding had very much more pleasurable experience, spiritual experience, blissful state, and insightfulness. Compared to those who were non-responders, they had more positive effects, and non-responders had more anxious-like experience. So already this study shows that probably the setup, the setting and set patients during the session with psilocybin was responsible for long-term outcome. So this is something what Eduardo already mentioned. This is our meeting with Hunikwi people in 2018 in Rio Branco. However, we had previous attempts with other communities and other centers already in 2017 and 16, which were unsuccessful. We went to Peru. We were communicating with people from Ecuador and Colombia. And finally, as Eduardo mentioned, we met in 2017, and then we went to Rio Branco and Pane, and all the other Hunikwi people with whom we discussed our project, where we wanted to study the effects of ayahuasca during the ceremony on brain activity, and to study its short-term and long-term effects, and also relations to nature and on personal relationships. As Eduardo mentioned, it wasn't an easy discussions. They have their view of world. We have a very different view of the world and of science. So finally, we get to some agreement that we need more discussions, and finally, on Hunikwi Assemblea, we adjusted some kind of cooperation that should lead to finalization of our study in the future. Meanwhile, we also invited indigenous people to our lab, to Prague. So the president of Honikui Association, Ninawa, visited our lab, and he let himself being recorded with EEG. He also went to an MRI scanner in order to show, to see his brain and to try whether it will somehow affect him or not. And then we also were contacted by an Italian anthropologist, Tania Re, who told us, okay, I've heard about your study, it's very interesting, and I might know also some people who are interested. There's a center in Peru, which is led by Ashan Inca leader, Maestro Juan Flores, and he might be also interested in participating in this study. So we also started to negotiate with the other tribe and other community in Peru. So in 2019, we went finally for a preparative expedition to the two places. First was meeting with Huniki people in Santa Rosa de Puros in Acre, and then we visited also Mayantuyacu. The purpose of the session was to get in touch with local people, to understand their habits and the way they are using ayahuasca, and also to test the equipment in this environment in the Amazon. So here we are already in Santa Rosa de Puros. This is a place where Honikui people take or participate on ceremonies and drink ayahuasca. It's called Teheran. As you see on the left side, we also tested the equipment there. The conditions are very different to those what we see in the lab. And technically it was very difficult because one of the equipments already failed because of overheating during the recordings that we were trying to make there. This is the setting in Mayantuyacu. We also met Juan Flores in person. On his left side is Tania Re, the Italian anthropologist. We explained him our purpose, what we want to do, and we also participated on some ayahuasca ceremony. So as we are scientists, all the team members also rated the ayahuasca ceremonies on which we participated during our trip. There were 3 ayahuasca ceremonies, and we have collected the data, the subjective experience on 11 dimensional altered state of consciousness scale. And what can be seen on the graph on the right side is that ayahuasca indeed had quite visual effects, and also induced some insightfulness in most of the subjects. As I said, we were trying to collect some EEG data in order to test the equipment that we brought in. And unfortunately, as I mentioned in the Hunikui session in Santa Rosa de Puros, the equipment was overheated and failed recording during the night. But during the session in Mayantuyacu, we were able to collect EEG of my ayahuasca session during the whole night. So on the right side, it's myself sitting with the EEG cap on the head. And on the left side, it's Maestro Juan Flores. We are trying to explain him what is EEG, what's the purpose of EEG, and what can be done with it. So this is my experience I had in Mayantuyacu. It was very interesting because it was kind of biphasic. During the first phase of the experience, I felt very disorganized thinking, and I had some visuals. It was very difficult to focus on anything. But then in about an hour and 30 minutes, the experience changed, and it started to be much more visual, and I was very likely to focus on the visions I had, and I was much more relaxed than during the first part of the experience. This is an important because what I will show later on in the data might have some relevance to the EEG data that we have collected on the place. This is my experience in terms of altered states of consciousness scale. The majority effects were visual. There was nothing else dramatic in my experience. And we are going to the to the EEG recording. So what we see here on the slide on the left part, it's something what we call beta activity, which is typically present with eyes open. On the right side, we see alpha activity, which is an EEG pattern typically present when the eyes are closed and we are relaxed. What we know that psychedelics do when we ingest them, they typically change the brain waves, the brain rhythm, into the beta signal, like on the left side, they induce desynchronization in the EEG. So how looked the EEG in my how looked my EEG during the whole session? So in the upper part, during the first 1 hour and a half approximately, actually I had exactly the pattern that the EEG the alpha activity disappeared, and there's the blue color indicates a decrease in the alpha activity across the whole cortex. However, at 80 to 90 minutes, something else happened. There was a switch from the decrease of alpha activity into a rebound of alpha activity and shift into faster frequencies. What we see here on this graph is a spectrum during different time epochs recorded during the session, different 10-minute time segments. And as you can see here, in the first part, the EEG was during the first 1 hour and a half was decreased, and that's what reflects to the beta activity, which is typical for all other psychedelics as well. However, in the later stages, there was a dramatic rebound of alpha activity and also shift to faster frequencies that remain persistent till the end of the session. There was also an increase in the slow frequencies in the delta band, which is typically present in dreaming and during sleep. And I would like to refer to a paper that was published by Christopher Zimmerman, who studied DMT, who showed that DMT might induce a dreamy-like state, and this is very likely what it might look like also in my session. Finally, we also analyzed the ayahuasca that we were drinking there. It was very interesting because we were looking on the major components of the ayahuasca, on the liquid part and also on the undissolved part, in order to find out what were the primary active components in there. And we can clearly see that DMT was present in the two compartments of ayahuasca, but the beta carbolines that are important for the oral effectivity of DMT were present only in the solid part of the ayahuasca brew. So I think that's all. I would like to thank to all people who are participating on this study, and also especially Eduardo and Bane, who made possible who made possible that we are joining the Hunikui people, and Tanya, who helped us with the Mayantuyaku Center, and also Maestro Juan, who is there in the leader of the Mayantuyaku Center. So that's all. I would like to thank you for your attention, and we can probably continue to the other part of the session.
Okay, Cameron, can we have Bane's presentation now? Could you launch the video for us, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Can everyone see it?
Amigo Chay Eduardo Schimberg, cientista, neurocientista. Eu gravo aqui meu áudio para minha história espiritual com as plantas medicinais, Unipai, Unipai, Shuripai, que eu tenho trabalhado ao longo do percurso do meu trabalho espiritual aí entre a floresta do Jordão, a floresta de Tarauacá, a floresta de Rio Branco, a floresta aí de São Paulo, né? Minha história começou aqui quando eu tinha na barriga da minha mãe, na útero da minha mãe, né? Minha mãe já fazia o consumo da bebida quando estava na útero da minha mãe. E aí, quando eu nasci, né? Nasci na aldeia Belo Monte, aqui na aldeia do Jordão. E lá eu cresci, né? Minha parte da minha vida, com 8 anos, né? Eu comecei a comungar a bebida sagrada do Nishpan com meu avô, que é posse do meu pai, né? Que o nome dele é Ares Maia, o nome dele indígena Xamutum. E assim que eu fui iniciado, né, na minha vida espiritual e batizado também com as plantas tradicionais, que é da nossa região aqui do estado do Acre. E iniciado também com o Nishpopimá, batismo, né, rito de passagem, né, quando a gente inicia o processo também de adolescente para adulto, né, temos rito de passagem em nosso povo, em meu povo Onicuim, que é o gente verdadeiro, né, o gente verdadeiro, o povo verdadeiro. E também significa o povo Onicuim, que é o povo da fumaça, né, e também significa povo no morcego, que Kaxinawá, né, povo, história do nosso povo. Assim que recebemos nossas mensagens ancestral dos anciães também, né, abuelos, nossos avós, nossas avós. Assim também, né, o preparo, todo um ritual, né. O que é o rito? É você plantar medicina, colher a medicina, né, cuidar como um filho, né, um membro da comunidade, né, plantar uma planta sagrada, né, na aldeia, na floresta, na mata. Aí tem um tempo de crescimento também, né, que você pode, o jagube, né, conhecido aí no mundo mundial, né, global, nacional, internacional, multinacional e multidimensional, né, muitos percursos de estudo científico, neurocientista. Esse conhecimento, né, dos povos indígenas, dos povos nativos, né, nascido e criado nessa região do Mata Tropical, né, que é o Mata mais do lado do Peru também, da Bolívia, Amazônia. E nossa criatividade, com todas as plantas de poder que traz essas transformações, incorporações do próprio espírito da ancestralidade, né, que conecta com a cosmologia, com os geometria também sagrada, com os canecos, o desenho também corporal no rosto, desenho do giripapo, desenho do urucum, pintura da jiboia, pintura das plantas, as pinturas também dos peixes, tem pintura de tudo, né? E assim, visões que a Ayahuasca traz, é dentro dessa espiritualidade cosmológica do universo do Shibu, do Dovo-san, da própria planta, encantamento, né, da beleza, né, que nosso corpo, nossa mente, nossa cabeça transmite através dos pensamentos, né, a consciência, traz coisas também revelador, né, da revelação do mundo espiritual, mundo quântico, cosmológico, mundo da percepção, né, do crescimento da evolução. Ao longo do tempo, praticando, tentando, com alguns grupos pequenos aí na minha caminhada em São Paulo, muitos estudos também, né, que traz dentro da percepção de uma condução espiritual, de conduzir um grupo, né, que cada interessante, que cada pessoa tem manifestação ou entendimento ou desentendimento dentro da mentalidade, né, como é que a pessoa absorva essa energia que recebe na projeção através da consciência, né, que a consciência do ser humano é muito complexa, né, cada um tem a sua complexidade científica, né, também material, né, e ajuda a gente num principal ponto de auto se conhecer, quem são nós como humano, no nosso aparelho espiritual, no nosso aparelho corporal, físico, emocional e sentimentos também, né? E conecta com o mundo do universo. Porque o mundo do universo é um mundo que são elementos da Terra. Né? O movimento do ar, da respiração, né? Que o nosso corpo inspira, expira. E assim o movimento, né, acompanha, né, os dois lados, né, os dois lados do mundo, né, e a gente não, quando estamos em movimento a gente não percebe, mas quando você está parado, meditando, consagrando, com alguns instrumentos, alguns cantos, os cânticos, né, dos Nishipan, do Dautibuyá, do Kayativu, da chamada, né, das plantas, que incorpora no mundo cosmológico. E através dessa cosmologia começa a ter pequenos insights na nossa mente, né, que transmite todo aquele movimento e entendimento do lugar, né? E isso depende do lugar. Se você está na natureza, se você está perto da cachoeira, se você está perto da montanha, se você está perto na cidade, né? Tudo é uma influência, né, do lugar. Enquanto mais você estiver na natureza, na floresta, na aldeia, na noite, na lua cheia, ou na lua nova, lua minguante, tudo influencia, né? Cada tempo é um tempo do relógio importante. Né? O tempo interessante é que quando nós comungamos a bebida, né, quando os cantos antigos, os cantos dos anciões, que ainda guarda, né, essa figura, né, a figura da mente, né. Então, o que eu tenho a contribuir com isso, né? Eu acho que tudo faz parte, tudo é perfeição do como um ser humano, como a mente humana, recebe e tem esse passo de auto se conhecer, né? Quanto mais limpo o seu corpo é, quanto mais preparo para comungar e consagrar a medicina, mais amplo e mais profundo. Profundo e na profundidade também de entender como que esse mundo da espiritualidade, como é que esse mundo da espiritualidade te leva a tempos muito antigos, lá atrás, o passado, o presente, o futuro. Muitas vezes as pessoas também traz a ilusão da mente, né? As pessoas que da cidade, né, que não são indígenas, que têm essas práticas também de estudo, né, que muitos, né, por aí na América, na Europa, na África, na Ásia, no Ocidente, na América Latina e no Brasil, na Amazônia e no Acre, né, que esse lugar aqui onde eu nasci são formas diferentes, são formas de condução das cerimônias, né, cerimônias na mata, com fogo, ou com cupixala, que é a casa da medicina, a casa da cerimônia, né? O jeito, né, que o espaço, o ambiente, os pássaros, os grilos, o sapo, se torna também tudo um contexto elementais, né? Quando os pajés, os xamãs, os curandeiros começam a iniciar, abrir um trabalho, um processo, as pessoas começam a entrar em processo de purificar, limpar, muitas vezes as pessoas, né, passam um processo de purificação, né, espiritual, vômitos, muitas vezes as pessoas choram, muitas vezes as pessoas põem afora coisa que estão dentro do corpo, né? Então, porque é um trabalho de cura, um processo de cura, tá purgando, né, que todo consumo também de alimento, né, que está no qualquer célula do corpo, né, nosso corpo, na nossa mente, nos nossos corações, e começa tudo num processo de purificação, né? Entra defumação, entra canto da chamada, entra canto de cura, entra canto de tranquilizar, né? O nosso os cantos do Mucá, que é os cantos sagrados, o cantos, né, que nosso Pipaco Chupá, Unicuim, o do auxílio na incorporação da medicina sagrada, que através, né, desse conhecimento da serpente, da jiboia, né, do Jubã, né, encantado da floresta, que trouxe esse conhecimento para o nosso povo, E tanto quanto os pajés e pajé, né, curandeiras e curandeiros, abuelos e abuelas, anciões e xamãs, né, tanto do Brasil, do Peru, né, o Shipibo, e entre outros povos indígenas, consagra essa medicina.
Gratidão, Leopardo. Muito bom. I'm going to make a few responses to these different talks. I've sent my comments in Portuguese to Leopardo, so I'll speak directly in English. And in my response, I'd like to make 3 brief points, but begin just by reminding us perhaps that these issues that are being brought up in this panel are not actually specific only to ayahuasca's encounter with biomedicine, right? There's a growing move across botany, ecology, and different Western practices of science to validate and incorporate indigenous wisdom. And in response to this, Indigenous organizations have compiled very exhaustive frameworks and model agreements to guide these interactions ethically. So it's really wonderful to hear that you're thinking about these questions, these ethical questions. On the program that I'm conducting, the Healing Encounters Project, these are definitely issues that we're paying a lot of attention to. And I confess that I was quite shocked yesterday to hear Wade Davis refer to Indigenous research ethics as political correctness. I think this is highly irresponsible on his part, given the wide platform that he has. If anything, these times require us to be impeccable allies in our moves to honor what Indigenous organizations across the world are asking, not as political correctness, but as political responsibility. So I'd like to situate my comments in reference to what Indigenous researchers themselves are saying about these encounters. And their comments tend to converge around the idea that Western science and nation states have typically denied or exterminated their communities and their knowledges. And when they have recognized or included them, they have tended to do so invariably on their own terms, right? So effectively negating Indigenous ways of life. So this leads to a situation where to be included or excluded ultimately amounts to the same thing, which is the enduring impossibility of maintaining an Indigenous way of life. So I think we really do need to pause and ask ourselves whose interests are actually being served in such encounters. How do we ensure genuine reciprocity here? Now, Indigenous research protocols often insist on a very important fact, which is that no universal standard can be applied to their knowledge as it is place-based, it's something that Benet has made very explicit in his talk, and grounded in Indigenous meanings and language. And these meanings are often untranslatable into colonial languages and conceptual grammars, right? They do not differentiate, for example, between individual and social, between material and immaterial, or between nature and culture, if we still want to use those old categories. In a very powerful presentation given to the Psychedelic Liberties Summit earlier this year, Indigenous scholar and activist Dayara Tucano, who, if you do not know her, please check her out, look up what she's put out there on this question of the globalization of ayahuasca from an Indigenous perspective. She's a very important voice. And at this summit, she explained that ayahuasca is, for her people, the fountain of all other knowledge. By doing this, I understand Dayara Tucano to be inviting Westerners to really listen to Indigenous wisdom and to cease to think that they can sort of grasp the meaning of ayahuasca without shifting their conceptual framework to encompass this entanglement of human and non-human existence and the stakes that this has for the regeneration of life itself. As Benet says in his talk, this is about, you know, the ritual of ayahuasca is about planting. It's about the regeneration of life in this very crucial way. So Eduardo and Tomas, I understand that you're committed to honoring Indigenous understandings of ayahuasca by situating your study in a naturalistic setting. But I wonder, is there not an inherent contradiction between standardization on one hand and this naturalistic setting on the other? The catch seems to me to be that the emphasis here is still entirely on Western diagnostics, where mental illness or whatever is happening is somehow located in the brain, which is contrary to Indigenous understandings of ayahuasca. And I think everyone at this conference agrees that mainstream Western therapeutics are problematic, but perhaps our diagnostics are equally problematic. So I had a series of questions about the way in which you're foregrounding the brain here, which seems to me like an incredibly Western framing still. And finally, neuroscientific understandings of ayahuasca render it an object of study. It's the thing that we're investigating, right? Instead of approaching it as the instrument of knowledge itself, which is the way I understand Indigenous people to be inviting us to sort of shift our perception. So referring back to Linda Tuhiwai-Smith's work that you mentioned, Eduardo, she's clear that she is not opposed to science, right? But she wants to see science unshackled from its relation to perpetuating settler colonial orders. And this means honoring the frameworks for respectful partnerships that Indigenous organizations have drawn up. And in these frameworks, securing ethical clearance from an Indigenous organization is only the first step. Respectful collaboration also requires many other steps, which include the research being directly relevant to Indigenous communities' needs and priorities, that consent be continuously renegotiated such that communities can leave when their values have been overstepped, that research honors First Nations understandings that all life is connected, the difference between public and sacred or secret knowledge, and that it completes the circle and returns the information to communities. And crucially, these frameworks also insist that Indigenous groups have the means to own, control, access, and steward the data that concerns them. Because as we know, when we turn wisdom into knowledge, this makes it subject to intellectual property. And now, if we look at psychedelic science's relationship to the patent and to IP and the broken pledges for open science and data, we can see why this is so important in these particular kinds of projects. So to conclude, I just say that it's important to remember that the earth isn't just burning, it is being systematically dissected for profit and standardized in the service of unbridled neo-colonial expansion. And science, the science that we're coming together around here, has been the handmaiden to this project. Fires, COVID, infectious disease, pollution, and hunger are the reality of our Indigenous collaborators right now. This is the set and setting of our collaborations with Indigenous peoples. Now, many people in the field of psychedelics seem very drawn to it for its ethic of compassion and its commitment to honoring the other in their healing journey. But I think we really need to probe ourselves and ask how privilege and our blind spots continue to lead us to exclude and silence others. And this is why the work that Biela Bate and everybody over at Chacruna on diversity have been doing is vitally important, particularly in this moment. Now, I think this panel as a whole, just to sort of bring things together here, raises important and key questions, in fact, for interdisciplinarity and intercultural dialogue within psychedelic science. And some of these questions are, how does psychedelic science relate to science's colonial shadow? Does it just want to be accepted by hegemonic science or on its own terms? Or does it have ambitions to actually transform these paradigms of science in support of social justice and equity? And what concessions are being made by the psychedelic science community and why? What are the effects and for who? In thinking about these questions, I think it's important to remember Audre Lorde's warning, we cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. If psychedelic science wants to do more than manage the symptoms of the global health crisis, it really needs to face these deeper issues, I believe. So now to open up the discussion more specifically around this expedition Neuron, Eduardo and Thomas, I'd like to ask you, what role did your Indigenous collaborators play in the design of the experimental protocol? What concessions did you or did they have to make? And how was this negotiated? How was that negotiation held? And will Huni Queen ritual experts figure as co-authors in the publications that you're going to produce? And if not, why not? And how could we imagine that? And finally, how are you shifting your focus in light of the acceleration of violence against Indigenous people in Brazil? Does this study, which began, I believe, 2-3 years ago, still have community relevance in this moment of hunger and COVID? So I'll let you answer this first round of questions and then we can take them from the Q&A.
Thank you, Emilia. Really, really wise words. I'm really glad to have you here with us. I'm really glad to see Thomas and Bonet again, even if they're far, far away from each other and from myself as well, all due to COVID. The first thing I want to highlight is that this is a work in progress. This is not something static. It has not been done. It is ongoing. So the results Thomas shared are preliminary results. And what happened is, while I was doing my EEG study back in São Paulo, Bonet wanted to volunteer as a participant. It ended up that he was traveling too much and he didn't participate as a volunteer. And me and Bonet, we had this dream. Wow, once we would like to go to the forest and do such a study in the forest. but we didn't have the means, the equipment, the funding, and so on. When I met Thomas in 2017, he already had a project approved at the Czech Ethics Committee. And then we started a dialogue with the Unicuin, with this thing kind of static, rigid, because of the Ethics Committee. And we started the dialogue, and the dialogue went on for 2 years. In these 2 years, we were invited to go to Acre to show to the Unicuin the equipment, how it works, and to participate in some ceremonies. And this was the time when Thomas collected some preliminary data, right? During the whole process, a lot of things started happening. As I mentioned, I started reading these things, and I'm proposing to Thomas, exactly as you said, that we should be flexible and allow for modifications in the protocol according to Unicuin knowledge. And I've been calling attention that they talk about 3 or more different vines. Which vine are we using? It's not only one. Who can choose this vine, and so on and so forth. So this is all happening, and it's beautiful to see it happening. And finally, that yes, we are getting into our project was approved, and it's now becoming a contract written by lawyers on all sides. And we will only publish stuff in open access journals, which accept indigenous people as co-authors, despite not having formal institutions or academic titles or so on. And as far as we can, we want to translate everything. Of course, it's challenging. I've been joking that I'm becoming the first Czech Hachakui translator in the planet, and I don't speak any of those languages, and I'm trying to translate this dialogue between these 2 very different cultures. And at last, I think neuroscience has a lot of limitations in understanding all this and in explaining all this, but it also is useful. And I think the process of doing this research, the process of bringing these cultures and epistemologies together, I think it will reveal with more clarity what are the limitations. But it's only by doing it that we can advance. If each one stays in its own corner, we're not gonna go anywhere new.
Thank you, thank you, Emilia and Eduardo, for your comments on this, and I must completely agree with Eduardo. It's a long journey since the idea we had in around 2016. It was like, yes, let's design a study. We'll have a active group who will drink active ayahuasca, and then we'll have some placebo. How we find placebo, and then it will be great to test the people also outside of the jungle, somewhere in the lab, and all these things were quite complicated, and it was already very difficult to obtain the ethical approval of the local ethics to perform something like that. And then I met Eduardo and Banet, and we went to Rio Branco, and we went to the first meeting with Hunikui people. We were trying to introduce our study to them, and it was a very interesting meeting for me, because it was the very first time I get in touch in communication with local people and the way they understand life and nature and everything. And it made a really big change into my understanding how we can perform a study like that. When we talk to people who don't know what psychiatry is, what is a EEG, or what is a depression, it's very difficult to explain them what's the purpose of our study. So there were, as Eduardo said, ongoing communication with them and trying to put our knowledge together in order to to reach a joint project that would be beneficial for both parts, because I think the 2 parts, indigenous people as well as the Western society, can learn one from the other. It's not like being separated, as Eduardo says, but it's like producing something together. And actually, I completely agree, and I'm 100% for publishing only in open access journals. One of the agreements that we've made is that there will be some documentary movie. We already got some funding for a documentary movie from the Czech Foundation, and that documentary movie will be translated also to the language of Hunikui people, and will be also distributed around them. They will have rights to say what they want to show, what they cannot show, etc. So it has to be a joint action, joint collaboration, and without it, I cannot imagine moving forward. And of course, the design of the study is it's alive, it's changing, and once we are on the place, it's never like we could plan or expect something. It's always a matter of adaptation to the situation that appears on the place. It's simply so dramatically changing than that talking about a very sophisticated Westerner-like design is something I believe unreal, at least at this stage.
Thank you for these responses. Just a follow-up question, perhaps. It's very clear the benefit that this research will have for you both and for psychedelic science in terms of advancing, integrating some of the insights of Indigenous communities. Could you speak to the benefits you see for Huni people in this moment of participating in this work?
This was one of the hardest points in all the negotiations, in my opinion. They questioned this all the time, and actually there is little benefit, if there is a benefit at all. This is very interesting for me. But the way I came to see after studying and rethinking the whole thing is that it does have a very important benefit to them, which is exactly to help the science, the Western worldview, to overcome the epistemic injustices. So I think that by bringing neuroscience into the forest, it may become more clear how it's not all in the brain and all the other aspects that are going on, and to connect, really connect ayahuasca neuroscientific studies with the whole context, the whole environment of the forest, the culture, the rapé, all the chants and everything else they do as the wider scheme. We were planning to go for the full recordings of EEGs and so on around April this year, and this was canceled due to COVID. And I have no doubt that at the current crisis, the project has no priority at all for the Unicuin. They have many pressing, urgent problems. I'm working with them on that. We're working on a smartphone application to help them show what's going on safely, anonymously, but this is a different project, a different topic. In the field of ayahuasca research itself, I'm quite convinced that only by going out there and doing a scientific study, we're going to be able to open the discussion in scientific journals of the serious limitations of neuroscience. But also, let's not exaggerate to the other side to think that brain measurements are irrelevant, because they are not.
I maybe would like to add one thing. When we were there and when we met all local people, it was very interesting to me to see that we are deep in the jungle, in the heart of the Amazon, around Santa Rosa, which is on the border with Peru and close to Bolivia. And we went to Aldea, which was nearby to the village. And all indigenous people were asking for mobile phones, for cell phones, for internet, for being on Facebook, being on WhatsApp, communication, etc. So we cannot speak about two different worlds. The indigenous people are influenced by the Western world, and as the Western culture is quite aggressive and addictive, using addictive tools, which is social media, etc. We cannot speak about like separation of these two things, but we can try to think about a collaboration and helping people to just live with the Westerner cultural things or techniques and tools in the way that they do not destroy them. Everybody is probably aware about the alcohol problem in indigenous people. It's something that was brought by Westerners, and it's destroying the whole communities. And many people many indigenous people are alcoholics, and they have really problems with it. And at least in the center where we were in Santa Rosa do Puros, where Nashima is the leader, he says, well, we are reintroducing the ayahuasca rituals into our people in order to protect them from alcohol, from the destroying habits of the Western culture, in order to protect ourselves, in order to protect the nature. And also we are offering it to Westerners to share the knowledge with them, to learn them about the importance of nature and connectedness and other things. So I think this collaboration already started, and it's inevitable that indigenous people will collaborate to some extent with Westerners. Otherwise, if they will be let to have an access to all the technology that we have, it might be something that will destroy them without being appropriately taught how to use it and how to behave in relation to these modern things. We do have a problem, addictive problem with social media and all other things that we are producing, and for them it's much worse than for us.
So thank you. We have a bunch of questions here in the Q&A. Many people asking if Bané would like to comment. Bané, não sei se você está escutando, mas tem gente aqui querendo saber sua opinião sobre a importância para o povo Runicuim desse estudo. Como você pode falar para a gente?
Bané is receiving translation, so we can speak in English, and there's a friend Gisele, she's translating everything to him, and she will also translate back what he says. Gisele, are you there?
First, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to participate in this conference. It's my first time that I'm participating in such setting, online setting. I want to thank the presence of Eduardo, and also say thank you to Emilia from what she said. And also say thank you for the people who are here. I'm talking from a perspective of an indigenous movement from Acre. We are aware of the potency of our sacred medicines and how this can benefit the world. I don't think this is of interest of only the indigenous people, but also many people around the world are interested in the sacred plant medicines offered in our cultures. We also need to be aware and be thankful of the pajé, the shamans, and the elders who hold this knowledge, this ancestral knowledge of those medicine, and we need to be thankful for them as well. I think there are different perspectives. Although, all right, can you all hear me? Yes, I'm sorry, just
Yes,
bad
yes,
connection here. Yeah, so Bunny was saying that the way that their people is deal and connect with the medicine, it's different from the way that majority of the people around the world are using ayahuasca.
Okay, unfortunately, I think Gisele is having connection trouble. So maybe just
Oh, sorry, I'm here.
oh, one
I'm
last
just
question, perhaps, and then we
I'm
can.
just listening to Bunny. He hasn't finished his talk. I'm sorry. Sorry, Bunny. Just desculpa, Bunny. Só interrompendo você por um momento. Bunny was saying that he actually have a question. He thinks that many people are interested in those research and also experiencing the power and the force of the of ayahuasca, but he also thinks that we should suggest an engagement with the new generation and talking with the new generation about the importance of the sacred plant medicines and especially the new generation of the villages themselves, so they can get back to the ancestral knowledge that is still exists in their village.
Giselle, time is running out, so I propose that we move the rest of Bunny's comments to the after room, and perhaps let's just give a big round of applause and thank you for this important discussion, difficult discussion, and I hope there will be space in forthcoming psychedelic congresses to continue this conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Emilia, sorry
thanks
to
everybody.
I would like to give you 10 more minutes just because... Beleza, continua.
Thank you, Joost.
Trying to be conscious of time here, but Gisele, let's continue then.
Bunny got a question.
There's a question here about how do we combine...
Bunny is actually asking a question. Just listening to that, sorry. What is it, Bunny? O que é, Bunny? How scientists like Eduardo and Tomás, who bring in this project and this research, connecting with people from Honey Queen in Acre. What is the perspective of the project in the future for the people, for the Queen people, but also for the documentary that it's going to be made? Of this study that it's so important, positive, or if they see this as something negative, or what are the limitations, and how the people from the Western people see this. What is the vision for the future for this project, for all of us? I believe, as I always said to Eduardo, that it's important to have this mutual participation and this collaboration, this collective collaboration. And they are, and I always said that they are the first scientists who are allowed to come to our village. So there is trust on that. Because most of the time it's really hard to negotiate with leaderships, with leaders from different villages. Because nowadays there are many leaders in the world with different views. But my question is, how is the participation of the indigenous people in this, and how we are going to be benefited from that? I think it's our responsibility together to think on those things. And my question goes to Eduardo and Tomás. Thank you.
Ouch. Thank you, Bane. I'll talk in English, and Gisele, you please translate. So I'll try to speak slow. First, it's an honor to have been allowed to visit Unicuim aldeias or villages, and to be initiated and to get to know your people and all the wisdom. I want to share a brief story that in Santa Rosa, where one of the places we visited in this process, Nashima's wife, Nashima is the local healer who conducted rituals for me and the Czech team with EEGs and so on. And his wife was for many years not interested in Nishipa. She was not drinking Nishipa, and she was not supportive of his work. And after we left, she restarted drinking Nishipa, and she restarted supporting him on his spiritual work, in part because she saw Westerners with technology valuing the indigenous knowledge and the indigenous medicine. So I think this is a microcosm, a very tiny example of what I hope we can achieve together on a much larger scale. So Western science and Western people right now, they are fascinated by the brain and what goes on in the brain during mental disorders, and how we can heal by looking to the brain. So if we help the Unicuim to show to the world what goes on in the brain, it doesn't mean that we are dismissing the spiritual or dismissing the indigenous culture. We're just bringing something else. It's an addition. Everybody can gain. And finally, as more and more people get interested in ayahuasca as a medicine, a treatment for depression and other ailments, I think we must unite to make sure that the benefits, including financial benefits, come back to indigenous people in the Amazon. So ayahuasca should not be patented. DMT should not be patented. as it's now happening with psilocybin from the mushrooms, for example, which has lots of patents and private corporations profiting for that without having ever consulted with any indigenous people. So these are basically my hope of how this project can help through videos, through books, and through scientific papers showing that there's much more to ayahuasca in an indigenous ritual, including the chants, how they affect what's going on in the brain and how people feel and who heals and who doesn't heal and so on.
Thank you, Eduardo, very much. And I maybe just add a little bit to this. I totally agree. I think, and thank you, Bane, for helping us achieving all this collaborative issue in this collaborative project. And I was so glad meeting you and all the people from Hunikui there. And I think the biggest benefit we have together on this project is that we are doing it together. Both cultures have some knowledge. We have very technical knowledge. You also have education in Western University. Many people from Hunikui, they try to get the Western knowledge. And I think this is one of the first times, especially in Brazil, where the situation of indigenous people is complicated. We are trying to get the knowledge together because you have your view of understanding what Nishipa is and how it should be used, and we have our knowledge from medicine perspective, from technological perspective, and I think there's nothing better than putting and combining these knowledges together, because this is the only way how we can make a progress on understanding nature, understanding psychedelics, understanding us, and understanding what are the mental disorders we are suffering in Western society, and maybe there are some other mental disorders that indigenous people are suffering, and that also might help understanding what is the way to make us feel better and make us closer to, let's say, healthy or safe life in connection to nature and in connection between people.
Do we have time for more?
2 minutes, and then let's continue.
Okay.
You can wrap it up. I'll wrap it up, and then we can send you to the next room.
There's a question about the phrase combining indigenous and scientific epistemologies is often invoked, but what does it concretely mean?
Yeah, I think we will only be able to answer this question by trying to do it. So I think the way is to go there and bring these people together and, for example, ask the healer what's going on during the night, and then go into the EEG tracings, for example, and trying to see what happens in the brain according to Western knowledge, but guided by the healer himself, and these kind of approaches. And only by actually doing it, we're gonna discover the limitations and the possible combinations and what we can gain by working together.
Another question here about distinguishing problems of underrepresentation, epistemology, and the diversity of ideas on specific questions, such as mystical states. Scholars from South America don't think completely different from those of North America. Do you still maintain a Western epistemology when you collect data within the rainforest?
I'm not sure if I understood this one.
Me neither.
Just going back up here. Question about the emetic and purgative effect of ayahuasca is seen as positive or synergistic, and if yes, how and why? And can you comment as well on the prospective effects of inhaled injected DMT, where the emetic effect is less prevalent?
Oh, emetic, okay.
Purgative.
Yeah, purgative. Well, the way Western society works with substances is to isolate the purest compound and then to give it and study it isolated, so the other influences can be eliminated, and we are just focusing on one thing. I think when drinking ayahuasca, the purgative effect is a part of the ceremony, and not everybody is vomiting. For example, I never vomited, and I never felt like vomiting. Maybe I'm a different person. Maybe I have a different microbiome.
I
Maybe.
almost always do it.
So I think it's a part of the experience, and the ritual is including drinking ayahuasca and including vomiting and including other things as well. And in the lab, we can test the substance itself, and we can say, yes, this is the effects of the substance itself, but that's not the ritual. So there are completely different views on studying these two things, and vomiting is nothing severe. We can speak also about vomiting after mescaline, which is a pharmacological mechanism, but people do vomit when they participate on mescaline or peyote ceremonies or San Pedro ceremonies as well. So it's just part of the ceremony, part of the effects of ayahuasca from my perspective, and it could be important to understand the knowledge from indigenous people, why they feel it is important.
Okay, Emilia, I think it's time to wrap up and move to the other room.
Off we go then. Thank you.
Can I before you go, I would like to offer some final words, because this is a panel that from our side has been very long in the making. I know Emilia and I have had long discussions about how to do this interdisciplinary multinational project justice. Eduardo as well. Sorry, I missed that. So I just wanted to recognize that this is a truly interdisciplinary effort that includes neuroscientific, psychiatric, qualitative aspects, and collaboration between scientists and people with more native knowledge. And I also realized that this is a very short time, and I'm not sure anyone here knows, but Banet is actually the only person who traveled to attend this conference. And I'm not sure if Banet can hear me, but queria expressar meu gratidão a Banet. Desculpa pelo tempo curto, mas estamos muito agradecidos pelo esforço de você chegar até a conferência e de contribuir a sua perspectiva. So I'm thanking Banet for contributing his perspective. And he's actually the only person who traveled from his village to Rio Branco to be able to participate in this conference live, which includes people that are based in São Paulo, in Rio de Janeiro, in Rio Branco, in Prague, in France, in Paris, and in Amsterdam. So the fact that we're able to have this conversation live, it's, I think, already a pretty good accomplishment. And I really hope that we'll have enough time to continue this discussion in the after talk in the meetup rooms. We'll post a link in the chat. And then I also wanted to remind people that we do have projects that they can donate to. We at ICPR, we have decided to donate the money that we would have spent on Banet's trip from Brazil to participate in Amsterdam directly to his project. And I encourage other people to donate this money to both Banet's project and to the project that would have featured Juan Flores. You mentioned Taniare. She will be taking the place of Juan Flores in another track on traditional medicine later today. And I also wanted to acknowledge one of our sponsors, ANT Neuro, who contributed the portable EEG machines that were used in the presentation that Tomas showed. And then finally, I wanted to tell people there's buffet banter going on. If you don't want to join this talk or you're not able to get in, there are multiple multi-rooms that you can access if you go to the community, to the meetups. These are rooms where you can just encounter other conference attendees randomly and just continue talking about whatever comes up. There's a cello concerto going on already. You can find the link in the agenda. Please don't forget to vote for the posters. And I think this is the longest wrapping up talk I've done. I think this has been the longest panel as well. Any final words from you, Amelia?
House, house.
House, house.
Ciao, ciao.
Tchau, 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 tchau. Muito
House, house.
Obrigado, Emilia. Obrigado, Joost, Banet, Thomas, and everybody.
Thank you, everybody.